je suis à Paris. Please forgive me for my accent of trying to speak French words, but we are in France. We are spending about 5 days in Paris, 5 days in Nice. And although this isn't a garden specific trip, we are seeing some gardens. I mean, and just walking around Paris, there's a bunch of beautiful plants that we can look at. But I did want to share at least some of the more garden related stuff with you on here. Now, one thing I'm terrible at is remembering to bring up my camera. Especially when I'm seeing something for the first time because I'm so immersed in it, but I want to try to do my best. So I know that we're going to the Claude Monet garden in Giverny. I don't think we have any other specific garden plans in Paris, but again, walking around and just looking at the beautiful gardens in the city, I'll try to capture some of those too. So hopefully I remember to pull out my camera enough to actually get some good quality video of the garden. So yeah, this is Paris. Hey everyone, so it is now Bethany from the future of what you just saw, although currently is the present, and I am now back in Chicago. I knew when we went to France that obviously I wanted to share any of the beautiful gardens that we saw there, but I also knew that it was going to be very unorganized because we were going to be constantly on the go. A lot of the gardens that we saw, we just happened to pass when we were walking by, so it's not like a lot of this was planned. So I figured what I would do is, now that I'm back, it's been about just a couple days since we got back, maybe about a week since the original Bethany that you just saw, but now I can kind of reflect, give you my opinion, tell you my thoughts, my experiences. I loved everything that we did, but I can kind of give you an idea of which ones I loved a little bit more than others. So I think this will make it a little bit more organized. I actually have my Instagram pulled up on my computer because I think I posted almost every garden related thing that we did there if you want to see more of these photos. But my plan is I'll talk, I'll share my experience, I'll insert videos and photos here in this video so you can see exactly what it is that I'm talking about. But I'm hoping that will make this a little bit more organized than the random video clips that I took along the way. So the first garden thing we did, I think this was, well, let me go back a little bit. So we spent part of the time in Paris, part of the time in Nice. I have never been to France before. I haven't been overseas since one time I went in college, and I was expecting to like Paris a lot more than I liked Nice. I still liked Paris a little bit more, but it was much closer than I was expecting. There were beautiful gardens in both, but my taste in gardens is definitely more of what was available in Paris. I think it's just because that's more similar to my growing zone, although I think it's like a growing zone 9 in Paris, if I'm not mistaken. Here we're obviously 6A in Chicago, but they had more of the plants that I can potentially see growing here. Whereas in Nice, it felt much more tropical. It felt like we were in Florida or California. There were a lot of cacti. There was banana trees and papaya trees, which I would never think of as something to grow in France. But the gardens there were still beautiful, just not quite as my style as the ones in Paris. But let's go ahead then and start with my favorite garden that we saw on our trip. Again, this was not a garden related trip, but my husband to support my love of gardens, and there's just really beautiful plants everywhere you're walking around. But my absolute favorite was visiting the Claude Monet garden in Giverny. Again, please excuse any of my pronunciations. But this was basically Claude Monet's residence in the last few decades of his life. And he has beautiful garden, which I think is technically split into 2 gardens. There's a garden near the house, which has a bunch of flowers. And then there is, I think, a Japanese style garden, which was across the road, where he built that from land that he had purchased later. What I thought was interesting and really fun is that he basically planted this garden so he could paint it. Like, that was the whole concept behind it. There really wasn't really like a veggie garden or anything that was maybe just there for use. Everything there was to look pretty, to paint. So he paid a lot of attention to making sure there were flowers throughout the season. He liked contrasting colors. There was a lot of that there, which I absolutely love. There was just a ton of colors in general, which again is my garden theme. Just the more colors, the better. So it was absolutely stunning. We were there in late September. And again, because they're a little bit warmer there, their growing season is longer. But I would love, I mean, this would be the dream, would be to see it like every season. If we were close enough, that's what I would do. It was about, I think, a 30 to 40 minute drive from Paris. Traffic in Paris is not great, like much worse than Chicago. But once you get out of the city, it's not that long of a drive to get there. And it was just the most beautiful garden I have ever seen. From what I learned there, Monet didn't like very formal gardens. So that's why everything, it wasn't a mess, but there wasn't a lot of like organization. It wasn't a very formal garden, which is again, kind of my aesthetic. And everything was in full bloom. Everything was gigantic. There were a ton of different colors there. Because we did have a tour that we went around, and I did mention, you know, did he plant or do any of this? Not really. He designed it, but other people were doing the actual work of planting and maintaining the garden for the most part. And then I think the gardens were neglected. He died in the early 1900s, so the gardens were neglected until after about World War II, and then they were restored, and that took about 10 years. And they still had his like original plans and designs, so they restored it to as close to the original as possible. So like I said, the gardens around his house are a bunch of flowers. The Japanese garden, there's a pond, which I'm sure if you're familiar with his work, a lot of what I'm showing you might look familiar. It was very lightly raining for the first part when we got there, which actually made it really beautiful, especially on the pond area. So I wasn't upset that it was sprinkling, and then it did clear up by the time that we were kind of halfway through, I'd say, the tour. I could have spent a lot more time there for sure, just wandering around. I think this day we actually overscheduled ourselves, unfortunately, but we did walk around the house too. And I don't think I took any photos or videos of the house, but it was very cute. Like it was very colorful, very bright. The kitchen was gorgeous. I think it definitely seemed to be most in line with my style, both inside and outside. So this would be something that if I'm ever lucky enough to go back to the Paris area, I would 100% head back to Claude Monet's house, especially if we were there during a different season. And I would just, I mean, again, I could have spent all day there. The tickets were not very expensive. I think it was like 13 euros. I might be wrong, somewhere between 10 to 20 euros. I don't know if they were timed. That might have been like a timed entrance, but you could have just then wandered around for however long that you wanted. So yeah, that was his garden. Absolutely loved. Again, this would be top on my list if you're a garden lover. This is one that we planned before going to Paris, so we knew that we were going to visit these gardens. Then as we were leaving, right outside of Claude Monet's garden, there is the Impressionism Museum, or what is it technically called? The Musée des Impressionismes in Giverny. Right, again, walk down the road. And this was really beautiful too. So we didn't go in the museum, but outside there were little rooms in the garden, and I believe these were designed, oh no, I have that in my Instagram. It was designed by an American landscaper, Mark Rudkin. So there were separate rooms that were surrounded by hedges. Again, this is nothing to do with Claude Monet, this is the museum. And he did monochrome looks. So there was like a pink room, a yellow room, and then near the end there were more colors mixed together, but I like that style too. I feel like my extreme is either all of the colors or like one color in different shades. So this was really beautiful. This was 100% unexpected. I did not know that this was there when we planned to go to Claude Monet's house. We were just, again, leaving, walking down the road and passed by and just walked through. And this was free. I'm pretty sure if you go inside the museum, you probably have to pay, but we didn't pay anything to just walk. I mean, it's literally off the road. You go into the garden. This would be a place where, kind of like the Chicago Botanic Garden, I feel like if I lived as close to that as I lived to the Chicago Botanic Garden, I'd be going there monthly just to see how everything changes throughout the year. I don't think it's open every month of the year. I'm pretty sure it closes maybe end of October, early November. But if you are anywhere near there, I would definitely recommend stopping by both Claude Monet's house and then the museum right out front, because if they're like 2 minutes away from each other, you might as well go see both. So those are probably like my ultimate favorite. Although I loved a bunch of the other stuff that we did, but I would definitely rank that as number one. I mean, Monet designed it to look pretty in his paintings. It was a very, very beautiful garden. So that was how we started our morning, was at Claude Monet's garden, and that was, I think, the next day after we got in, pretty sure. And then that afternoon, we went to Versailles, because both Versailles and Giverny are outside of Paris, so we thought if we're already outside of Paris for one, go to the other. I'm thinking it was maybe about a 40-minute drive between the two. these definitely should have been different days. So when we were planning to go to Versailles, the idea was to go actually, inside of the palace, which we did. And we spent a lot of time in there. I'm very glad we did. It was beautiful, but I would say it is one of those things where now that I've done it, it's great. I wish we had spent more time in the gardens, again, as a garden lover. So there are stunning gardens there. Right outside of, I'd hope so, it's a palace. So right outside the palace, there are different quadrants of gardens. I don't know if I took any photos of these or if I did, if they were any good, because we were kind of far away, because we were definitely in a rush. I would say if you're going to do Versailles, you could even spend the whole day just doing like the inside or the garden. And we were there half the day trying to fit everything in. So beautiful flowers all around, lots of pretty colors, but then the orangery area, like the formal with all the bushes, I know I have some video or at least photos of this, was absolutely incredible. I wish we could have spent more time walking around down there, but even seeing it from kind of the top view, it's just amazing. And it's things like that that I can't even fathom how much work goes into keeping a garden looking that nice and tidy. So I love the gardens right outside the castle. And then we walked around the more like formal area. We saw a fountain show that went off, and they were telling us about how like this is the exact same fountain that was happening when King Louis lived there, and it was all manual and you had to wait till there was enough rainfall. Obviously it's not that way anymore, but thinking that I'm seeing things happening now that seem complicated, but they were doing it hundreds of years ago, was incredible. And then we went to my favorite part of Versailles just at the very end, kind of as like an afterthought, which is called the Queen's House, because Marie Antoinette had her husband build her a whole separate house and little village on their land so she could escape there from, I guess, the daily life of the palace. So her house itself was really beautiful, but that wasn't my favorite part. We then walked to what's called the Queen's Hamlet, which is essentially a little village that looks like it was straight out of a fairy tale. There were a bunch of different houses. I think it says there are 10 small buildings surrounding a lake that was built not by Marie Antoinette, but for Marie Antoinette. And there are gardens outside of them, and it just felt like such a magical place. Even the walk there from the Queen's house to the Queen's Hamlet was beautiful. It was so close to closing time. I think we only spent 10 minutes there maximum, and it made me really sad because I didn't realize this was there. I had no idea when we got the tickets, and I think you do need separate tickets or you need at least a ticket that covers both inside and outside, or you can buy just a ticket to the outside in the gardens. But then they also mentioned that there is a tour, which if we ever go back, I'm doing just the gardens at Versailles most of the time at the Queen's Hamlet. There's some tour that I have to figure out if, again, we ever get back there, that they'll actually open up one of the houses at the Hamlet and walk you through. And I think that would be really fun to do. So yeah, that area was just completely magical. It was the only time, I think, on our trip where I wish I would have spent more time there. Like I could have spent more time at Claude Monet's, but I was able to see everything that I wanted. This one I definitely felt more rushed, so I wish we had separated out our days a little bit more then. So just keeping that in mind for if you do decide to go to Versailles, you can definitely dedicate a whole day just to seeing the palace and the gardens. So that was all one day. That was probably the busiest day. Again, that was the day that we had 100% planned everything that we did. Then the next gardens we happened on by chance. We were walking back from the Eiffel Tower. This was the only day that I got blisters because I decided to wear not the best walking shoes because they were the cute shoes. I mean, they were flat shoes, but they were like loafers, not tie-ups tennis shoes. And so I had blisters all over my feet. But we decided to walk back from the Eiffel Tower to where our hotel was, which was maybe about an hour walk, which is normal for us, but normally I'm not getting blisters while I'm walking that long. But we happened upon a garden show that just was happening. It was called La Fête des Jardins at Parc de Belleville. Parc de Belleville. I think it had been going on, I'm pretty sure I took videos of this for just like a few days, maybe a week, but you could see the beautiful gardens just as soon as you walked by. So no matter how much pain I was in, we crossed the street to walk through the gardens. And from what I remember, here actually I think I have it in my Instagram notes. So the exhibition, so there was an exhibition of the flowers and then there were a bunch of booths. set up around, and they were giving away plants and stuff, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't have taken a plant and kept it alive and then flown home with it anyway. So we didn't visit any of the booths, but the exhibition was two gardens that kind of met in the center around the fountain, and it was called Two Professions, Two Photographers, and the right side was painted all in different shades of pink, so kind of going back to the Impressionist Museum, the monochromatic design. I mean, there were some other colors, but pink was the dominant, and then on the left side, red was the dominant. Both were beautiful. My favorite color is pink. So that was my favorite side of the garden, but they were both just incredible. I mean, it stopped me in my tracks from across the street seeing that. And I was so excited that we just happened to walk by that. If you're going to travel, and I'm sure if you do normally travel, you know this, but my favorite thing to do is just walk. Like, have a day where you don't have anything planned, walk around, and you will stumble upon some really incredible things. So those gardens were pretty. I don't know if that'll be mostly videos or photos that I have of that, but again, just happened to walk by that event. There were no other specific garden planned activities while we were in Paris. We were pretty close to the Louvre, so we did go through like the inside of the museum, but then we also walked around the gardens, which were really beautiful. There were a lot of people. It seemed to be like the place to hang out there. So that was really nice to walk through. But there were fountains, there were beautiful flowers. There was a great view of the Eiffel Tower from that area. We were also close to the gardens at the Palais Royal. So that was, again, not very like flower heavy. There were some flowers there. I think we kind of just missed the peak of the timing of the roses. There were a lot of rose bushes, but that's the area where the trees are like very like evenly trimmed. It kind of reminds me of a place, the Chicago Botanic Garden. Maybe that's where they got the inspiration from, of the square trees. So that was really pretty. We walked through there almost every day just because, again, it was so close to where we were. And just coming as an American going to Paris, I have seen Emily in Paris. I didn't want to be the American though that goes there and is like, oh, I've seen Emily in Paris, so I know everything and I recognize that. But the Palais Royal was in that. I don't know if I recognize that or not, but I did recognize where the office is because that was also very close to our building. So I didn't want to point that out to everyone, but I did see that. We also ended up eating at a restaurant or a cafe that was also in the show. And when I was watching, because my husband's not seen it, so I was pulling up clips of it on Netflix there to show my husband, like, oh, that's the door that we walked by. Oh, this is the cafe. And then we were watching it, and I realized the waiter who waited on us at the cafe was the waiter in the scene from Emily in Paris. So I don't know if he is also an actor or if they just happened to use the actual staff in the show. But I thought I was going crazy. I was like, is that him? That's definitely him. My husband confirmed that as him. So as much as I tried not to, notice everything that was in Emily in Paris, I did notice a lot that was in the show. So that was, I think, everything kind of Paris specifically garden related. I'll put in here any other photos or images that I saw. There were some really beautiful decorations with fake flowers, which I'll always obviously lean towards having real flowers if you can, but fake flowers, when you're doing decorations outside, are going to hold up in the weather. They're going to stay there throughout the seasons. I mean, even the McDonald's had beautiful yellow fake flowers decorating it. So it was really pretty walking around. I also really like the style of the buildings, which I think is called the Haussmannian style. So just like aesthetics, I really enjoyed Paris and all the plants and all the flowers. They have a lot of balconies, but they're not the balconies that you can like really step out on. It's just a few, maybe a foot away from the window, and there were a lot of people that had plants growing off of their balconies, so that was really nice to see. So that was Paris. Then we took the 1.5-hour flight to Nice. In terms of just, I would say, how the trip felt, Paris was definitely more go, go, go because there was so much to see. There's still a lot to see in Nice, but it was much more relaxing of a time there. Again, it kind of felt like you could have been in Florida or California, but with a lot more history. So in Nice, we also did a lot of walking around. We did a lot more walking around because we didn't have as much planned. But one thing we did have planned was to go to the, what is it called? Jardin Exotique in Aise, which is not too far from Nice. This is right outside. And Again, this is one of those things where I appreciate the beauty of it, but it's not the plants I love the most. It was incredible though. So it's in a is very narrow. So the garden itself is very tall. I did not know there were gonna be that many stairs to climb. Luckily I did have my better walking shoes on that day, but it was a lot of stairs up and down, and a lot of cacti, plants that you would see in more tropical climates, a lot of green, not as many like colorful flowers, but it was still beautiful to see. And I know that, I think it was said somewhere that they don't get a lot of rainfall in like one of the plaques that I was reading. So, they're designing it with plants that can handle drought, can handle less rain. And it was just stunning. The view from up there too, of seeing the sea, was just incredible. So as much as it wasn't, what I would consider to be my favorite type of garden, it was still an incredible experience and a very beautiful garden. And if you love more tropical plants like that, more like drought tolerant plants, aloe, cacti, you will absolutely love this garden. So I would definitely recommend going either way. Again, I don't think this was expensive. I think it was 10 euros per ticket. Walk around as much as you want. And then there was, it's very narrow. And I was reading that too, because there's so much sunlight, they like to have narrow walkways so that the buildings help to shade the walkways. But there's a bunch of like stores all around the area that was cute to walk through too. So I really, really loved going there. But my favorite place, I think, that we went in Nice was another town called St. Paul de Vence, or de Vence. This was just a, hey, let's go somewhere and again, walk around. This wasn't full of flowers or anything either, but something about it just felt very magical. So there were a bunch of cobbled streets that we were walking down. All the buildings, very, very, again, small town, small area to walk through. All the buildings were made of stone, and the planting was just incredible. And I'm pretty sure almost everything was in containers, and as a container garden, those are things I can appreciate. And the fact that they don't get a ton of sun, again, because the alleyways are pretty narrow, it was just kind of incredible to see what people were doing with the plants. And I assume, because most of what we walked by was people's homes, so I assume it's maintained, I guess I don't really know, maintained by the residents and not necessarily like by the town itself. But it was incredible. There were a lot of terracotta pots, a lot of climbing plants, a lot of trailing plants. There was a grapevine growing over a balcony. So now I feel like I need to have a grapevine growing over my balcony. I absolutely loved it. There was 2 cats. There were 2 cats there, I think. So that's another reason why I loved it. They did not let me pet them. The cats, so the people in France, very friendly. Cats in France, not very friendly, did not seem to want to be pet by me. So I respected their decisions, but we did see a couple cats there. But the area itself, I don't think, it wouldn't have been a thing where you spend a whole day there, but we spent a couple hours just walking around and it was just really beautiful. The last garden related activity that we did in Nice was also planned. It wasn't, again, technically in Nice. Are any of these pictures technically in Nice, or are they all little towns around? I'm not sure. I'll also put in some pictures just from Nice as well. But we ate at a restaurant called Mirazur. They have their own garden. And as part of like going there, they also give you group tours of the garden. So we did that. And this was really beautiful. It's built on a hillside. So there's different terraces that were built up. I am probably going to get the history of this wrong. But from what I remember, it used to be some area that was held by some sort of royal who had that land. And then at some point, someone else got their hands on it, maybe like a real estate developer or somebody that poisoned the land or did a bunch of things to the soil that made it not great for growing plants. So then the owner of the restaurant, who now owns the land and I think has a small house on it as well, has been slowly rehabbing the soil. I believe there are 7 terraces in the garden, and 3 of them have been rehabbed enough so that they are good for planting. But this was also just stunning. And I mean, to see something that's so drastically different from where I garden, I mean, terraces on a mountain, there are no mountains here in the Midwest. So going up there was incredible. That's where I first saw the banana tree and realized, oh, this is a very different growing climate than what I'm used to and what I was expecting to find anywhere in France. But they had bananas, papaya, mango, passion fruit they were growing there, and obviously they grow it for the restaurant. So that was on like the first terrace, and then There were a bunch of herbs everywhere, tomatoes, I mean, everything you can expect. But then there was also, I don't know if I have a video or just photo of this, but there was a little like gardener's shed, which looked like it had been there forever. And I'm assuming it probably dates back to whoever the royal person was that owned the land. But again, to be somewhere that it seemed like there's so much history around you was incredible, because that's not always something you get in Chicago, especially compared to the history of the places that we were in Europe. So that was a really, I want to say cool again. Cool doesn't seem like the best word to describe it, but it was a really cool feeling to have that sort of history. Like, oh, the place that we're now using for our garden shed has been here for 400 years, maybe. But it was really a nice experience to be able to see how important the land is to the restaurant. The person who was giving us a tour actually said, it's not a restaurant that has a garden, it's a garden that has a restaurant. And they change up the menu throughout the season to reflect what they're growing. They did say they can't grow, obviously, everything in the land that they have for the food that they serve, but everything does come from somewhere local if it doesn't come from their garden. So that was really nice. So I'm trying to think if there were any other plant-specific things that we did in Nice. I feel like there were, walking down the street. We did a lot of walking there, like I said. It was very different than Paris in terms of the plants in Nice, just hanging off of the buildings. There were some parks that we walked through, but they didn't seem as garden focused as more than just like trees and playgrounds instead. But yeah, I think that is everything that I can think of. So I will have posted the photos and videos in here. If there's anything else that I've forgotten, and as I'm going through my camera roll, I remember, I'll just put them at the end. But it was truly an incredible experience. And even though it seems like we did a lot of garden stuff, like I said, only 3 or 4 maybe planned. Most of it was just walking by and seeing beautiful flowers, which you can't help but see there. So it was really nice. And I do appreciate that my husband appreciates my love of gardens and will do some of these activities with me too. But I definitely got a lot of ideas that I probably won't be able to implement because I don't have enough space. But it's nice too to kind of get out of what I typically see around me and get some new ideas. So it was really fun. It was a really great trip, an incredibly memorable trip, like the best trip I've ever taken in my life. So I'm just really thankful that we got to go and spend the time there. So thank you so much for watching. If you've been anywhere in France that you would also recommend, leave it down below. When I was sharing stuff on Instagram, there was a good handful of people that were going to be there in the next year. I think a lot of people are going for the Olympics, which most people there told us to just stay away in 2024 because it's going to be very, very busy. But if you've been and there's anything else down below that you can think of, or if you've been here and you want to let me know what you liked, leave that down in the comments below too. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.